Following Activision's release of the highly acclaimed Spider-Man 2 movie game in 2004, developer Treyarch would incorporate many of its elements into a second Spider-Man game released the following year, based off the Ultimate Marvel imprint that the comic books were implementing at the time. The Ultimate Universe was a reimagined and modernized version of Marvel characters and stories, aimed to appeal at the younger teenage demographic of comic book fans. Leading into the new millennium, comic book sales were way down due to the crash the industry suffered in the 1990s, and publishers like Marvel and even DC were realizing that younger audiences were turning away from comics, mostly in part due to the convoluted and messy continuities that had been established over the span of several decades. It was really hard for new fans to get into comics. Not only were they difficult for kids to afford and keep up with, continuity-wise, but the characters within them, in many cases, had grown up into adulthood, making it harder for kids and even teenagers to relate to them as easily as they could before. So in 2000, adjacent to the regular ongoing Marvel continuity, the Ultimate Marvel Universe was launched, and over the next several years, we would see complete overhauls and reboots of iconic Marvel superheroes, such as Spider-Man, the X-Men, and the Avengers, which had been rebranded as the Ultimates, just to name a few. Though the Ultimate comics varied in quality, especially in their later years, it was still a very smart move on the part of Marvel to launch the imprint in the first place, and it was a huge financial success for the company. It did what it set out to do. It introduced younger fans to these characters and got them interested in reading comic books again. I read the Ultimate Spider-Man comics when I was a kid. Those were the first Marvel comics I started reading on a consistent basis. They were the only comics I had any interest in reading at the time. And when it was announced that there was going to be a game released based on them, I couldn't have been more excited. In my eyes, it had endless potential, and, much like the comics, it would be able to bring in new fans. Video game fans that might not have thought about picking up a comic book before. It was a brilliant marketing strategy on the part of Marvel. And so, this finally brings me to my video game review. Does Ultimate Spider-Man still hold up today? Is it still just as kick-ass as it was back then? And can any fan of Spider-Man still enjoy it, not just the ones that read the Ultimate comics back in the day? Let's find out. Ultimate Spider-Man features a story written by Brian Michael Bendis, one of the primary writers of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. In the game, Peter Parker is investigating the death of his parents, as well as the creation of a black suit his and Eddie Brock's father had worked on, now in possession of Trask Industries, who had tricked them into selling it before they mysteriously died in a plane crash. The suit was created to find cures for terminal illnesses, and possesses various healing properties, not to mention can greatly enhance the strength of its host. Peter would break into Trask Industries and steal the suit back for his late father, and quickly finds himself covered with a portion of it. At first, he feels great with all this power, but learns that the suit is in fact unstable as it begins to consume him. Though Peter is able to remove it, Eddie Brock comes in contact with the rest of the substance after he learns his childhood friend is Spider-Man, and that he tried to steal the suit, their inheritance, all for himself. The suit bonds with Eddie and transforms him into a violent monster, Venom. In order to survive and prevent the suit from killing him, he has been forced to drain the life energy from civilians. To retrieve the black suit, Trask Industries owner, Bolivar Trask, hires Silver Sable and her Wild Pack to track Brock down, which puts her into conflict with Spider-Man, who is in pursuit of Venom to stop his path of death and destruction. Along the way, Spider-Man is also forced to face off against other villains, such as Beetle, Electro, Rhino, Shocker, and the Green Goblin, who are all connected to Trask and his associates in some way. Nick Fury, Sharon Carter, and S.H.I.E.L.D. also pop up throughout the story, and interfere with Spider-Man's attempts at stopping Eddie. The vast majority of Ultimate Spider-Man's narrative takes place after the events of the Venom arc from the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, issues 33 to 38. While the game provides you with a quick summary of what happens in that story at the beginning, I feel it relies on the player having read the Ultimate Spider-Man comics to really understand the full scope of what's going on during this game. While I'm somewhat familiar with a lot of these characters and their backstories within this Ultimate Marvel continuity, even though I haven't read any of these comics for several years, I feel your average player would be somewhat lost with a few of these elements. A lot of these characters seem to just pop up in the story without much rhyme or reason, without an explanation, without any backstory, and are gone from it just as fast. It can make the entire narrative feel a bit disjointed, and even kind of thin as a result. You feel like you are missing a lot of information. Now, I understand this game would have been primarily targeted at fans of the comic series, and that makes sense, but looking at the story again now, almost 20 years since its release, revisiting it would be rather difficult for your average mainstream gamer, especially compared to a lot of other Spider-Man games that have since been released. Even when I was playing it again for this review, I found myself having to touch up on my knowledge a little bit to really know the full extent of what was going on in the story. By the time the end credits rolled, I had a few questions, and the only way to answer them was by looking it up on the internet. I don't know if that's necessarily good for a superhero game to do. Again, this game was designed for the fans of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. I'm not expecting it to be accessible for each and every person, but because it's older, because it's centered around a universe that has since ended, and in time, less and less people will be familiar with, then it reduces its appeal to future generations. That's the sad truth. A lot of the superhero games I look at on this channel are ones I grew up playing, ones I want to be remembered and enjoyed by future generations of fans, regardless of how old the games themselves may be. But in the case of Ultimate Spider-Man, despite how awesome and fun its gameplay is, which I will get to in a second, I feel in regards to the story, it might not connect as easily as some other Spider-Man games do, just because it relies on you to be somewhat familiar with the Ultimate comics, having at least read a few of them, and I don't know if everyone is willing to do that kind of thing to play a simple video game. Just saying. Anywho, let's pause on the story stuff for a second and get into the gameplay of Ultimate Spider-Man. Being that this game was released a little over a year after Spider-Man 2, it's structured in a very similar way to it. You play through a series of story missions, and after each one, you have to accomplish side objectives to unlock the next and progress further. Instead of doing civilian missions to collect a certain amount of hero points, now you just have to complete a certain amount of side objectives in a variety of categories. You can collect various tokens scattered throughout the city, take part in races to earn medals, and even do combat tours, which consist of you going through a series of battles against gang members to clean up the streets. I love Ultimate Spider-Man's progression system a lot better than I do the one in Spider-Man 2. By removing the hero points, they were able to simplify everything, put all the objectives on the same playing field, all worth the same amount, and because the game switches up which tasks you have to complete after each story mission, different combinations of them, that means you end up playing more, a greater variety, which makes all of this feel a lot less repetitive. In terms of the web swinging, I think this was improved upon as well from Spider-Man 2. Your swings aren't interrupted nearly as much as they were in the previous game, and yet it still manages to maintain that realistic feel to it, with the physics and everything. It takes a little while to get used to because it feels like once you hit that R2 button, Spider-Man is locked in some sort of predetermined arc or something. It's hard to explain, but regardless, I enjoy this web swinging a lot more than I do Spider-Man 2's. If you get too close to the ground, or water, you can also climb your web to increase your height, or maintain it, whatever works for you, and you will need to master this ability for some of the chase sequences you are faced with later on in the story, especially the one featuring Beetle when he activates all these force fields, some high, some low. It's pretty annoying. When it comes to the combat, it can be really addictive in this game. The square button dishes out punches, and the triangle button performs kicks, and by pressing them in a variety of sequences, you can perform some pretty kick-ass combos, even rebounding off nearby walls if need be. Performing web attacks are also much easier than in Spider-Man 2. The only nitpick I could make about this combat system is that instead of pressing a single button to perform a counter, your dodge in this game is your jump. Every time you see your spider sense flash above your head, you need to jump to avoid taking damage. While this is easy to do, I find it sort of cuts the legs out from under this entire combat system, because you find yourself doing jump attacks, leaping around like a jackass more than anything, pressing X and then square, or X and then triangle, and aren't on the ground as much as you'd like to be, and I find the ground combat to be the most enjoyable and addictive aspect of this entire combat system. It's a shame that you can't be on the ground for more than 2 seconds before you have to leap into the air again, especially when the enemies get stronger in the latter parts of the game. It's almost as if the combat system becomes sort of non-existent, just jumps and then strikes, rinse and repeat. It's kind of unfortunate. If playing as Spidey gets stale for you though, Ultimate Spider-Man gives you the option to play as Venom as well. It was the biggest selling point of this game, and was in a lot of the marketing material leading up to its release. The taglines were "Be legendary, be predatory," and "Be a hero, be a villain, be both." Playing as Venom in this game is fucking awesome. There is no other way to describe it. It's easily the best aspect of Ultimate Spider-Man, bar none. Throughout the story, at certain points, the game automatically switches control between Spider-Man and Venom, and they each have their own story missions for you to complete. I'd say the narrative is split down the center, 50-50, and if not, it's pretty damn close. Playing as Venom is vastly different than Spider-Man. His focus is on creating a trail of destruction. Instead of web swinging, Venom utilizes giant leaps, Incredible Hulk style, to get from point A to point B. When you climb walls, Venom leaves behind claw marks, and every impact you make knocks up debris in your wake. You really feel like a powerhouse. There is weight behind this character and his movements. Combat-wise, you get to utilize the Black Suit's tendrils, and can swipe at enemies with your big beefy hands, even grab them and snap their spines if you want to, which is super addictive. I feel like a monster myself saying that. All of this power comes at a cost though, as your health slowly depletes even when you are not taking damage, the result of the Black Suit slowly killing Eddie Brock inside. To counter these effects, you must consume people to absorb their life energy and replenish your health. Regular enemies give you a little bit, they are a light snack. Pedestrians are like a full-course meal, and little kids holding Spider-Man balloons, well, they are the sweetest of delicacies, the true nectar of the gods. Despite the Ultimate Spider-Man comics depicting Venom with his iconic white spider emblem on his torso right from the start, the game shows him without it, at least until the very end. You see, Silver Sable ends up capturing both Eddie Brock and Peter Parker, and takes them to Trask Industries, where Peter is then experimented on by Adrian Toomes. He injects him with his own makeshift sample of the Venom suit, which has an unexpected reaction with Peter's blood, turning him into Carnage. As Venom, you are forced to fight him, and it's only after defeating the monster and freeing Parker that Brock is able to fully control his symbiote after successfully absorbing the Carnage symbiote, combining it with his. To my knowledge, and I could be wrong with this, it's been a while since I've read them, but Carnage in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics was just a humanoid symbiote monster, wasn't he? There was no one inside of it, no human host whatsoever. Making it be Peter Parker at the end of this game, even if it's temporary, is a pretty cool idea. It helps the game stand out from the comics a little bit, and is an interesting explanation behind Venom getting that white symbol on him at the end of the story. After you beat the game, you unlock the ability to play as Venom whenever you want, and free roam the city, well, sort of. Despite Eddie Brock being in full control of the suit after absorbing Carnage, his health still depletes automatically, forcing you to drain civilians to stay alive. You can cause destruction, which is fun, but once you do, it activates a rampage mode, where you rack up points based on how many enemies you kill and vehicles you destroy, earning a high score. The higher the number goes, the more enemies that spawn into the city to stop you, and the stronger they become as well. It's basically one big endurance round to see how long you can survive before succumbing to the endless waves of police and soldiers. Honestly, I never played a whole lot of this mode, even when I was a kid, because I found it to be rather repetitive. Yeah, the enemies get stronger the higher your score gets. It definitely offers a challenge to the player if you're into this sort of endurance type stuff, but I don't know, it wasn't really for me. If I'm going to play as Venom, I'd much rather just play through the story again. Without the connective tissue of the narrative, I think his gameplay gets a bit stale, at least to me. Without the ability to do races, city events, and combat tours like Spider-Man, I guess this is all they could really have you do as Venom once the story was complete. I found it to be kind of lackluster. Ultimate Spider-Man has a lot going for it as a superhero game. Being able to play as both Spider-Man and Venom is really cool, and both of their playstyles can be quite fun in their own ways. The visual style of this game, based off the work of Mark Bagley, one of my faves, is also phenomenal, one of its strongest aspects, and really helps it stand out from a lot of other games in the genre, especially ones that were out around that time. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little disappointed with Ultimate Spider-Man after revisiting it after all these years. Like I had mentioned earlier in the video, it relies on the player having some knowledge related to the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, which can make some of its story elements feel a bit disjointed and frail at times. This game is also short, like really short, a lot shorter than you might remember, and after beating it again, I was left kind of unsatisfied, wanting more. I feel the story doesn't really live up to its full potential. A lot more could have been done with it to make it feel more complete, to beef it up just a tiny little bit. The only reason this game might feel long is because the developers use cheap tactics to artificially pad out its length. Some sequences in this game are really difficult and unforgiving with their levels of frustration. You'll find yourself having to restart a lot of these missions over and over again, which could end up adding countless unnecessary hours to its runtime, which is ridiculous. The biggest culprit of all this, and you knew I was going to bring this part up at some point in the video, is the chase sequence with Electro as Venom. While it only takes me a few attempts to beat it now, back in the day this almost forced me to stop playing this game entirely. I almost gave up beating this game as a kid because I couldn't get past this level. Even if someone was pointing a gun at me and threatening my family, I just couldn't do it. This chase is poorly designed, let's be completely honest. Venom's gameplay style does not mesh with Electro whatsoever. There are some tricky chase sequences involving Spider-Man in this game, sure, but they pale in comparison to this one with Venom. The game's difficulty spikes here, the curve rockets to the moon, and it stands out like a sore thumb compared to every other part of this game, which is fairly easy. It's so inconsistent. Alright, so you got a guy that can fly and shoot bolts of electricity at you. You have to follow him without the ability to web swing, and instead have to utilize these massive leaps into the air. When you jump, more often than not, you lose track of where Electro is. He is no longer in your field of vision. Several times throughout this chase, Electro will release a burst of electricity, which will send you flying back if it makes contact with you, in the opposite direction of where you are supposed to go. If you fall too far behind, or get caught trying to maneuver yourself around a building or something, you lose Electro and fail the mission. Sucks to be you. The worst part of all of this, the extra little dookie on top of this shit sandwich, is when you reach the Empire State Building. Not only do you have to haul ass climbing up it, and I mean haul ass to prevent yourself from losing Electro yet again, if you get too close to the top, too close to Electro, who decides to unleash another one of his electrical bursts at the peak, well, you will find yourself flung off that building faster than you can say Bob's your Uncle Ben, and will fail the mission almost instantaneously. Why, you ask? Because, like I have mentioned, you can't web swing. In fact, you can't really web zip either. You have this tendril thing that can latch onto buildings, but it has a really short range, and when you're falling from that height and thrown that far thanks to electro, ain't no building close enough that's gonna save your ass before that distance meter at the top maxes out. It's an instant fail, so you cannot get hit by that burst under any circumstances. Like I had said previously, I can beat this part of the game in a few tries now. It doesn't take me that long, because I know what to expect. I'm older, I'm wiser, I'm more experienced with video games now. But when I was a kid, this part was so difficult, it caused me so much anger and disdain towards this game that it wasn't even funny. I almost gave up. I wanted to stop playing. I didn't even want to see the rest of the game at that point. I thought, fuck it, fuck Ultimate Spider-Man, fuck Venom and his jumps, and fuck you, Electro. I hope you burn in the deepest, darkest pits of hell. I still hate this sequence of the game, but not as much as I did when I was a kid, because I see it for what it is now, a cheap way for the developers to pad out this game's runtime, this game's story, because like I had mentioned, it's really short, criminally short, and when you take out these longer and time-consuming moments that you were forced to replay multiple times, this game is really thin, narratively speaking. It's still a fun story, I still enjoy playing it, I love watching those awesome comic book-inspired cutscenes and everything, but like I said, after revisiting it after all these years, I found myself a little unsatisfied with it. Ultimate Spider-Man is still a good game, a good Spider-Man game, but I can't help but feel it could have been so much more. Maybe it's just me. What do you guys think of Ultimate Spider-Man? Make sure to let me know in the comment section down below. If you would like to have a say in which superhero, comic book, or anime-inspired video game I take a look at next on the channel, become a patron over on patreon.com/channelNerdGasm to participate in monthly polls and even nominate specific video topics for me to do on here. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, stay nerdy, stay safe, and long live your inner nerd.
Get it in gear! I thought this was a chase, not a freaking walk in the park! Come on, pick up the pace. You gotta keep up, boy! My grandma moves faster than you!